Шановні колеги,
Dear colleagues, we continue our working day, and the topic of our current press briefing is as follows: observations on the situation with internal displaced persons in Ukraine. We have Dr. Chaloka Beyani, UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights of IDPs. Mr. Beyani, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. May I simply welcome you to this press conference, which marks the end of my 9-day follow-up visit to Ukraine. And I recall that during my first visit in September 2014, it was in this very room that the press conference was held. So it's a happy reunion for me. I call upon the government of Ukraine to formulate a comprehensive strategy to prevent and address internal displacement, as well as durable solutions. I urge the government to intensify its efforts to protect the rights of internally displaced persons from the conflict-affected east of the country and the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. 2 years after my last visit, I commend the government of Ukraine for the progress it has made to address the situation of internally displaced persons, including the adoption of a law on internal displacement and the establishment of a ministry for temporary occupied territories and internally displaced persons to deal directly with internal displacement. However, more needs to be done to effectively implement the law and harmonize resolutions passed under the law, as well as establish effective coordination mechanisms of response to displacement between national government ministries, as well as among regional and municipal authorities. One of the main challenges affecting the welfare of internally displaced persons I have found is the link between IDP registration and payment of pensions and social benefits, a system currently based on the verification of place where IDPs reside. Payment of pensions and social benefits must be delinked from registration, as this has led to problems in the verification of the residence of IDPs, resulting in a suspension of such payments, affecting some 500,000 to 600,000 IDPs in eastern Ukraine, and this needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency. Internally displaced persons should be able to receive their pensions and social payments wherever they are in the country. I note that the combined effect of the registration system and the suspension of payments is leading to secondary displacement, mass movements, and unsafe spontaneous returns that need to be addressed. Internal displacement has posed challenges to the original system of assigned residence called Propiska, to which social benefits were tied. Although this has been abolished under the law, it must be discontinued in practice. In government-controlled areas, the government has to ensure freedom of movement and choice of place of residence, while in non-government-controlled areas, the leadership of the territories under the control of armed groups is bound by the same obligations to the extent proportionate with national and public security measures. I have seen myself the issues around freedom of movement as I cross the contact line. At the few available checkpoints along the contact line, people queue for hours or days at great risk to their safety. There are no effective special arrangements for the elderly, children, pregnant women, or persons with disabilities. With winter closing in, the situation is only bound to get worse. Unimpeded access by humanitarian actors and others must be guaranteed unconditionally by all the parties involved. During my last visit, I met with a number of IDPs in collective centers who described experiences similar to those when I have visited at this point in time. The main challenges they face with winter approaching and without possible solutions in sight. They have identified durable housing as a key element of solutions, together with access to livelihood opportunities. However, this remains to be addressed as recommended after my last visit. I also note the lack of a mechanism for protecting housing and land and property left behind by IDPs and compensation for damage or destruction to such property. Ukraine is in the top category of countries with the highest number of internally displaced persons worldwide. The ongoing conflict since April 2014 has placed hundreds and thousands of people in a difficult situation, forcing them to flee their homes. Internally displaced persons in Ukraine call for peace and resolution of the conflict. They are encouraged by the ceasefire that has held since 1 September this year. The Minsk process, which is handling issues of peace in the Ukraine, must also include the resolution of internal displacement. I call upon the international community to support the government of Ukraine in its efforts to address and resolve internal displacement. Thank you very much.
Дякую вам. Переходимо до запитань. У нас є час всього на 3 запитання, тому по черзі, будь ласка, представляйтесь і адресуйте питання.
Дуже дякую. Мене звати Анастасія Пугач.
I am Anastasia Pulgach, Donbass TV channel. My question, you mentioned that about that payments of pensions and social benefits are linked to the registration and thus people cannot get these pensions. Whether United Nations can somehow influence the solution of this issue, and so that the pension could be paid to people. Thank you.
Firstly, you answer, and then next question.
Oh, okay. I thought we were going to take 3 questions at a time, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the issues that we have addressed already. We will be debriefing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs later in the day. But with regard to all the government partners and international partners that we have met, this is one recommendation that has been made. And it's a recommendation which at least appears to carry resonance with many. And I would be surprised that if this recommendation is not carried forward at some point in time.
Нагадую, що у нас є час ще на 2 запитання. Будь ласка, ви перша.
I am the director of the Institute of Legal Policy and Social Protection. You have not mentioned that there is a decision of 3 national courts of Ukraine, including the High Commercial Court from 2015, where we were representing the interests of the claimants from non-controlled territory, that all the social payments were stopped. Basically, the people who came and just got registered to get pensions, and then they went back to their territory, and then SBU stopped, basically passed some instruction to stop payment them pensions. And your colleagues, Mr. Shemanovich, mentioned about that solution, about that decision, and he said that Ukraine has to execute it. Your report does not mention it, and you're talking only about people who were registered. But according to the court ruling, any citizen of Ukraine has this right to get the pension and social payments. So basically, in the result of some inspection of law enforcement bodies, 352,000 people who previously were receiving pensions now do not receive pensions. What will the UN be doing? Because on the 3rd of June, Shemanovich was here, and to my question, he said that within 2 weeks, the Minister of Social Policy promised to resume these payments. The payments were not resumed. Don't you consider that non-payment of pension is the sign of the genocide of own people?
Actually addressed the question of pensions, benefits, which is why I say they should be delinked from the registration of IDPs and separated out. The obligation to pay pensions is owed to those people who have reached a pensionable age throughout the country, whether they're IDPs or not. But in the context of IDPs, all these issues are linked. And when social payments are stopped, the pensions are also stopped, which must not be the case. Yes, I've come across the decision of the courts that this should not be discriminatory. Payments should not be made through a single bank. People should be able to get their payments wherever they are. And it seems to me that simply complying with that decision would take matters further in the context of IDP protection. But because of the requirement that people should come here, receive their pensions, and then go back, enormous movements of persons are being caused. And this is one factor that also has to be looked into so that people actually receive their benefits, pensions, where they are throughout the Ukraine.
Наступне і
The next and the last question. Amilchenko Roman, the Civil Position NGO. I paid attention that in your report you are talking about many important technical issues, but fundamental issues of violating human rights in relation to IDPs are left outside of attention. I mean, applying Article 15 of UN Convention if there's no state of emergency, and the violation of the election rights, and the direct boycott of the laws which were passed on protection of IDPs, the boycott by the government. The law was passed in 2015. The budget was passed in 16th of December, and the law was passed on the 25th or 24th, not to be included into the budget. This is all is not included into your report. And now, a very small example: the children of IDPs who are entered the universities have right for free of charge hostels. They cannot enjoy that right because this was not included into the budget by the Cabinet of Ministers. That is just the purposeful boycotting and violation of the rights of IDPs. I would like to give you the address from the platform of those who suffered in the east of Ukraine, the organizations which are involved into protection of their rights, so that all that is reflected in your report. And in the future, we'll be able to present some additional information for you with all the documents.
Thank you very much for your question. I can't convey everything that will be in the report as a result of my findings. So what I have given out to you is simply a press brief which highlights the most important issues that I have found. So we certainly have addressed the issues of the state of emergency. It needs to be publicly proclaimed. Clearly, that's a procedural requirement. There must be notice given to the Council of Europe under the European Convention on Human Rights, and also notice given to the Secretary General of the UN in relation to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Both instruments are concerned, and it's not Article 15 of the UN Convention. It would be Article 4 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and it would be Article 15 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And the things to address here is that obviously the state of emergency must be necessary. It's based on necessity and legitimacy. It must be proportionate, that is reasonably related to the situation that poses a threat. And the measures taken must also correspond to the requirements for the protection of the population, as well as the protection of IDPs. And they should not derogate from certain important human rights standards, such as the right to life, the prohibition of torture, inhuman or degrading treatment. In all our meetings, these issues have been addressed, and of course they'll be in the report as well. We have addressed the issue of the documentation, civil documentation for children and others, the measures that are being taken to exempt IDPs from court fees in this regard. These measures have been proposed and they are before Parliament, before Cabinet at the moment, and our understanding is that Cabinet will approve them fairly shortly in order to ease the situation. We have discussed the issue of the notary powers that are required in the context of parents wanting to move children across either the administrative line or the contact line. So all of these will be reflected in the report, and we've had full measure to digest them. Thank you.
В нас ще є час на два лаконічних запитання.
We have question for two very short questions. Good afternoon, Zinovia Bajena, NGO, Crimean IDPs, refugees. My question is about people in Crimea. According to Resolution 356, there is a resolution on depriving of the status of the IDPs. We have the Crimean people in Kiev who lost this status because of different reasons. According to the law on free economic zone, without the status of IDPs, Crimean people become non-residents of Ukraine. And even though the response of the Department on Protection of Human Rights say that these violations are not very serious, but people are faced with the problems of blocking the credit cards, they cannot get payments, the system of taxation is different, and there were cases when they would go to medical facilities and the hospitals would refuse to take these people. I would like just to draw your attention to these facts. Thank you.
Thank you very much for drawing my attention to those facts. We came across those facts as well. Although we did not go to the Crimea for very obvious reasons, but our discussions touched on the situation and the conditions there, including of internal displacement, and the measures taken by the government to invite citizens of Ukraine in the Crimea to come out to Ukraine to get their benefits and go back, as the case may be. But one of the major problems in that regard is that the authorities in the Crimea now require you to have an international passport, preferably a Russian passport, to cross over. And if you have a Ukrainian passport, then there will be limits on your residence in the Crimea, and there's a process of extension which is bureaucratic.
Останнє запитання.
Last question. NGO, right? Miroshnichenko, I have a question. The problem related to the people who suffered the NATO zone, military and civilian. Unfortunately, in your report, this hasn't been mentioned. We are just using the numbers of monitoring mission of UN on the number of the victims, and neither the international organizations nor governmental organizations of Ukraine are dealing with this problem. I would like to learn what is your attitude to that from the point of view of norms of human rights, and what should be the norms here in Ukraine, and whether you will be planning this work, and what should people do, those who have no social protection of the state, no legal protection.
Thank you very much for your question again. The international legal position, of course, is regulated by international human rights law on the one hand, and international humanitarian law on the other, which regulates the conduct of those involved in the hostilities. And according to both sets of laws, those that are in the non-government controlled areas have a responsibility with regard to the areas that they control, because they are in effective control of those areas. The government of Ukraine also has responsibility in relation to the areas that it actually effectively controls. So both parties are regulated by that. But the problem you mentioned, of course, is one that we have come across and that we have addressed, and it exists on both sides of the contact line. Which is the lack of distinction between civilians and military targets and operations, the lack of proportionality, that is that civilian houses are shelled when under international humanitarian law, civilians are protected, they should not be targeted, and measures taken to fight the conflict must also clearly be reasonably related to measures of safety for the civilian population. They are innocent. They are victims of the conflict. They should not be victimized further. However, the issue we have found, of course, is also the occupation of civilian houses by military forces on this side and by armed fighters on the other side. No one denies this. It's very well documented by the monitoring bodies that you have mentioned. and it is something that we have highlighted already in our discussions, and it is something that we'll highlight this afternoon when we meet with the National Security Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Beyani. At this point, the press conference
Thank you.
is coming and looking forward to seeing you here in the nearest future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is my last visit as rapporteur because my mandate ends at the end of October, but you will have my successor who will come and engage with you along the same lines, and I hope that when I come here next, I'll just be a tourist, meeting the people of Ukraine and saying hello to them in the ways that I've not been able to do so. Thank you.
Good luck and take care.
Thank you.
Шановні журналісти, до уваги.
Dear journalists, now in the press release in Ukrainian, there's some misprint in the first sentence in the position.
З питань про права внутрішньопереміщених осіб.
And the correct position is the Special Rapporteur of the UN on the rights of internally displaced persons.